Thanks for joining us as we dive headfirst into all things people, power, and politics. This is The Pulse. I'm Roop Raj. President Trump's push to end mail-in voting and get rid of voting machines is still making headlines across the country tonight, and a lot is being said. We told you last night how, simply put, the Constitution says he can't. Well, tonight we're going one-on-one with Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson with why this executive order is a tall one that will likely be held up in court. Plus, a Republican and Democrat you know well debate on that and their thoughts on the president's onslaught of executive orders. And we're taking on the cuts to Medicaid and SNAP benefits from President Trump's budget bill. A dietitian and a spokesperson for so many who are advocating for these folks are going to be talking about what we can all do to make sure our family's health are safeguarded, what you can do about it coming up. That conversation in about 20 minutes. We have another loaded show for you tonight, so toss that phone aside. Don't wonder what's true and what's not. We have all of your big stories we're following at politics right now at this hour, starting at the United Nations, where senior officials say humanitarian aid cuts have left victims of sexual violence around the world without life-saving help. Those cuts forced some clinics and shelters to close. While the UN official didn't name any countries, many believe she was referring to the U.S. and other donors. President Trump pulled back as the world's largest aid donor, and before that, other nations reduced humanitarian spending as well. And this woman, National Intelligence Director Tulsi Gabbard, announces they're revoking the security clearances of 37 current and former national security officials. Gabbard accuses them of politicizing or weaponizing intelligence to push partisan goals. It's part of a broader push by President Trump to scrutinize the judgment of intelligence officials that he doesn't see eye to eye with. Critics say it's silencing dissenting voices in government. Well, here at home, turning to the race for governor, where Detroit Mayor Mike Duggan announced 200 endorsements from community leaders, local mayors, and other politicians on both sides of the aisle. You'll remember he's running as an independent. The list includes several former Democratic state lawmakers and former Republican Congressman David Trott. So as we like to do on The Pulse, let's quickly go by the numbers. The total number of endorsements he announced today is more than 200 current and formerly elected leaders. Breaking that down further, more than 100 city council members and trustees say they support Duggan. Also, more than 25 school board leaders, 9 former state legislators, and former Congressman Trott himself, who we mentioned. We have a long way to go until November 2026, and every single candidate that's watching this is saying, oh, wait, I have something up my sleeve up as well, and we will be covering all of it. We're here for all of it, and it'll be right here on The Pulse each and every night. Turning now to President Trump's crusade against mail-in ballots and voting machines. He's vowing to get rid of both of them with an executive order, but he's got a major roadblock: the Constitution. Just a reminder of our reality check yesterday. President Trump has said he may be wrong, but he believed we were one of only a few countries that actually do mail-in voting. He said many countries got rid of it because of corruption. And he's right, partially. France is one nation that banned it for that very reason. Other countries like Japan and Poland have limited it to those with disabilities. But here's the thing. Dozens of other countries do use mail-in voting as well, including our neighbors, Canada, by the way, Germany, Switzerland, the United Kingdom. They all use mail-in voting. And most notably, the president actually has no control over elections. The Constitution gives that right to the states. But Congress has the authority to make or alter rules for those federal elections. The president isn't mentioned at all as someone who has powers over elections, and the courts have agreed that presidents aren't involved. And we should point out once again, there is no evidence of widespread voter fraud. There may have been some irregularity that is in many elections, but no widespread voter fraud. But despite that, President Trump doubled down on those claims once again.
Mail-in ballots are corrupt. Mail-in ballots, you can never have a real democracy with mail-in ballots. And we, as a Republican Party, are going to do everything possible that we get rid of mail-in ballots.
Joining us now to discuss the president's claims, Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson. Even as she runs for office tonight, she joins us in the capacity as the head of elections for the state of Michigan. And Secretary Benson, it's good to see you. Thanks for joining us here tonight.
Always a pleasure. Thanks for having me, Roop.
So you saw how we broke that down. Is there something that we missed that you, as the head of elections, want to point out about what this president is saying right now?
Yeah. I would preface this by also saying this, where did this come from? It came from Vladimir Putin. I mean, Donald Trump said specifically, hey, I talked to Putin yesterday, and he said that we should get rid of all mail voting. So let's do it. I mean, the idea that Putin and Trump should be conspiring about how to make voting more difficult in our states is astounding to me. A American president conspiring with a Russian dictator on how our elections should work in Michigan and throughout our country. But here's the reality. Neither Vladimir Putin or Donald Trump dictate how our elections work. The people do. And here in Michigan, citizens on both sides of the aisle voted overwhelmingly to ensure that they have a constitutional right to vote from home, to vote by mail. And we have established in several elections, not only is that system legal, safe, and secure, but that millions of voters, again, on both sides of the aisle, embrace that opportunity. Senior voters, military service members serving overseas, and millions of others. So I'm going to stand with the voters on this one, not with Vladimir Putin, and protect our citizens' right to vote by mail because we know it's a secure convenience that all voters embrace.
Let me ask you this. When you look at this as a secretary and try for a moment to take the politics out of this, in terms of being clear and being a more safe version of voting, is in-person voting the safest way to vote, hands down?
No, the safest way to vote is the way a voter chooses at their convenience to have their voice heard. Because, my husband was serving in Afghanistan when he voted by mail. That was his only option, and that was just as safe as any others. So no matter how someone chooses to vote, the important thing is that it's their choice. And then it's on us, the professional election administrators all across this state, to ensure whatever legal way they choose to cast their ballot, that it is safe and that is counted just as equally as whether they showed up to vote early at an early voting site, in person at their precinct on election day, or in the weeks prior to the election through the mail.
You came on our newscast, right during the 2024 elections, and we talked about mail-in voting. And one thing that's definitely striking and noteworthy is the fact that at that time, President Trump was actually going out of his way to talk about how people in the Republican Party, Republican voters, should use mail-in voting because he understood that was a real opportunity to get more people to vote.
Yeah, that's the really other extraordinary thing here, Roop, that the president has actually not only endorsed that method of securely voting from home, voting by mail, he did it himself in past elections, too. So the real question is, what's going on here? Why is the president trying to create confusion and make people doubt this very legal, safe, and secure way of voting? In some ways, I think it's because he's scared. He's scared of the power of the people, of voters, especially as they move towards the 2026 elections, which will be an opportunity for them to vote and hold him accountable.
What about Congress? Are you concerned about Congress doing his bidding? I mean, they do have the power to alter the way things are done.
Yes, but in our law in Michigan, the law is clear. The ability and right to vote by mail is in our state constitution. Now, if Congress wants to overreach their charge as well, we'll fight it out in the courts, because the U.S. Constitution very clearly gives to the states the ability to manage the time, place, and manner of elections, and that has historically been interpreted as something entirely within the purview of the states, with the exceptions of boundary-setting laws like the Voting Rights Act, which set large boundaries for what is and isn't okay, like discrimination at the ballot box.
I want to ask you one last question. I know France essentially doesn't honor mail-in voting. They don't do it because of concerns over corruption. I know Japan and Poland have, I don't know about concerns, but they only have it reserved for people with disabilities. Do you see a reason behind other nations looking at mail-in voting in that light?
Well, let's also look at Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Great Britain, and several other countries who actually do allow citizens to vote by mail in a very safe and secure way. I mean, to me, the question is about what does a voter need to express their will in any election? And when the voters in the state of Michigan say clearly and unequivocally, we want the right to vote by mail, as they did in 2018 in amending our Constitution to create that right, it's our job to protect that will.
Yeah, the law is the law, and that is what you are executing as the head of elections, and it is the law of the land, and that's something that we all continue to follow. And again, noteworthy that President Trump himself during the last election was on board with it as well. So this is an interesting conversation, and one that we're going to continue to have with you, Secretary Benson, and others as well, as that fight, of course, may end up in the courts as well. We thank you for your time here tonight.
Thanks for having me, Brew.
Good to see you. We're keeping this conversation going after the break. Conservative Terry Johnson, former Detroit Federation of Teachers President Keith Johnson, the two of them sit down and debate about if Congress will do the president's bidding. You're watching The Pulse here on Fox 2. Back now on The Pulse, looking at all things people, power, and politics. Joining us now to debate President Trump's goal to eliminate mail-in voting and voting machines and other issues on the table here tonight. Attorney and conservative advocate Terry Johnson and former Detroit Federation of Teachers President Keith Johnson. They may share a last name, but that's about where the similarities end. The two actually politically couldn't be further apart, but it is so good to see you both. And as always, we thank you for having a civil discussion, something that social media could certainly learn from without having to scream and yell at each other and wring each other's throats.
Thank you, Ruth.
Maybe I spoke too soon because the interview just started. But I do want to talk to you about this. So let's begin with where we left off with Secretary Johnson.
Benson.
Benson, excuse me. I'm looking at Mr. Johnson.
Oh, I understand.
But when you look at what Secretary of State Benson said, there's a lot of truth to what she said. The law of the land is the law of the land. Where do you think President Trump is going with this?
Here's my interpretation. I think President Trump wants this discussion out there. I think if he signs an executive order, I don't think it's going to have any teeth, quite honestly. But I think he wants the discussion out there. And this is a great way to get it out
Why?
there. Why? Well, you've got the 26 elections coming up and you got the 28 elections coming up. And it's all about power. People want to keep their power. Now, are there issues with mail-in ballots? Of course there are. I mean, are they substantial? That we don't know. But I think President Trump is doing nothing but getting the conversation out there and basically saying, without saying it, if you don't fix it, I'll fix it.
Are conservatives or MAGA Republicans afraid of the onslaught of mail-in votes that could come from Democratic voters and could help win an election?
I don't think that's the issue. I think people want a fair and balanced, well, I don't want to say balanced. I think people want fair elections. And what do I mean by fair? I think they want every legitimate vote to count. Notice I use the word legitimate. I don't want people who are not registered to vote being able to turn ballots in, or people who are ballot harvesting.
So there are irregularities out there, and we know that. We've reported it on this network, on this channel. We know there have been irregularities since the beginning of elections. But to say that there's widespread voter fraud is simply incorrect. Even Republican bodies have said that's just not true. Does this president realize that, you think?
I think there's still a little bitterness from the election in 20. I mean, listen, first of all, there's no way anybody believes Joe Biden got 80 million votes, more than anybody else. However, we've moved beyond it.
We have moved beyond it, but then
Right.
we haven't when this president brings it up. And so, Keith, now the discussion becomes again about whether or not mail-in voting is a legitimate way of voting, when in fact, as pointed out, that is the law of the land. What do you think is behind this? What's the fuel behind it?
Well, here's the central issue from my perspective. We happen to have a president who views the Constitution as an impediment to his agenda. Through his executive orders and everything, how many of them do we know are in contrast to what the Constitution dictates? This is simply another issue. Everyone knows that states' rights covers the regulation of elections. President has, no, it is true.
No, it's not.
It's
Well,
yes, it is.
It is true.
It is true.
The states have been given the jurisdiction over their respective elections. That is true.
They have been given the jurisdiction, but it's dictated through Congress. And the part of the problem is, if you go back to Pennsylvania at the last election, or was it in 20, the problem is people were making decisions that the legislative body, and they're the only ones who get to do this, get to make. It's not Secretary Benson, it's not Governor Whitmer, it's the Congress of the state.
Well, I stand by my contention.
And that's the law. That is the law.
Having taught government for years and years and all this. But here's the other thing. Heritage Foundation did a study of the elections over the past 25 years. And in their study, they found that only 1/100,000th of 1% of voter fraud took place across the country over the past 25 years. So this is a situation where you have a president who's trying to come up with a problem in order to utilize his solution.
Terry, I want to ask you a very simple question. Does the wind out of this man's sails just get kicked right out when we know, and we had video of President Trump literally on camera saying that we should go and do online mail-in voting? He actually encouraged his base to go out and do mail-in voting. When it benefits him, he was on board. And now suddenly he's won the election and he's not. Is that a hypocritical stance there?
It's not consistent. Let's just say that.
But is it hypocritical?
Well, I don't know. I mean,
yes.
Here's the thing. I know it's not consistent. And the question comes down to this, if this is what I got to do to get in, and now once I'm in, I got to look and say this is wrong and we got to change it, then that's one thing. So I don't know if that's the position he's taking, but I can say what he's said and what he's doing are just not consistent.
Is he concerned about holding on to power? Is that the issue that's at stake here?
And again, I don't think it's him trying to hold on to power. I think it's the Republicans. And again, if Congress, which is Republican, were to do this, they have the opportunity to do these things. I don't think it's going to get to that point. Again, you've got the Supreme Court of the United States, in my opinion, in the way of all of this.
Keith, right now, there's been, 191 signed executive orders, 30% of 100 of them, so 30, more than a quarter, are held up in court right now. More than 90 lawsuits. This president is not operating with his pen, but rather at the behest of how those courts decide to adjudicate these cases. Those are the guardrails that people talk about, right?
And that is what I think is the fundamental problem and the fundamental concern among many Americans, actually on both sides of the aisle. Because let's just say, for the sake of this brief discussion, if President Trump is able to get away with all of this, and if in the future we have a Democratic president who tries to do some of the same things, then for all intents and purposes, our democracy is destroyed. The purpose of the Constitution is to establish guardrails at the federal, state, and local level. This is the only president in my lifetime and in all the history that I've studied who has ever treated the Constitution as though it was an impediment.
So you don't know Barack Obama or Joe Biden is what you're saying?
They didn't treat the Constitution as though it was an impediment to their agenda.
You can read the Constitution, but people will interpret it differently. And that's why you have these people who wear these black robes called judges. And when we take them, and they're the ones who make the final decision, but not government teachers.
But we also know in this particular case, Congress will perhaps at least make the first big decision in this case. They have the authority to make or alter the rules at the federal level for elections. So we'll have to watch this really carefully. And we are watching it very carefully. And we'll invite both of you to come back and talk about it as we continue to watch it. Thank you both. Again, they share the same last name, and they share none of the same opinions. It's amazing, but you did it in a civil way. We appreciate your time here tonight on The Pulse. We're turning to the Medicaid and SNAP benefit cuts, but from a different angle, our registered dietitian on the impact they could have on families and what we all can do. You're watching The Pulse here on Fox 2. It is People, Power, and Politics. Welcome back to Detroit's only nightly political talk show. This, my friends, is The Pulse. Joining us now to talk about the Medicaid and the SNAP benefit cuts and how they impact our families, registered dietitian Jessica Nurick. She has a PhD in nutrition science as well and has really taken over a lot of social media with millions of people who watch and follow her all the time. And for her message, which is so important because it empowers us to understand what we can do and what's at stake here. And so, Jessica, thanks for your time here tonight.
Thanks so much for having me.
I want to ask you a little bit about, you're in charge of making sure that, you're putting out programs that keep people healthy and make sure that people know the right things to do when it comes to nutrition and other things. But you've had to take on public policy as well, and you have for years. What right now is most concerning to you about these impending cuts that are coming because of that budget bill?
Yeah, so a lot of my work is looking at, what is going to keep Americans the healthiest? And so what are the policy-based decisions that we can be doing in order to extend health to all Americans? And so some of the biggest, most evidence-based ways to do that is to expand healthcare access, to expand nutrition assistance access, to improve what we call the social determinants of health, which are like decreasing kind of like economic disparities and things like that. And so when we look at kind of what's happening right now with healthcare cuts, it's quite concerning.
I want to ask you, what is the story that no one's talking about? Because we talk a lot about the work rules that could be put into place, and you have the political fight about people saying people should go and work or do community service or become educated if in a further way, if that's what they choose. But it's deeper than that and bigger than that to you. Talk about what we're not hearing.
Well, when it comes to healthcare, I think what a lot of people, we tend to think, okay, our tax dollars are going toward these healthcare programs. And it's true, 78 million Americans, 1 in 4 Americans are on Medicaid, for example. So if we're specifically talking about Medicaid. But what a lot of times gets lost in these conversations is the fact that when we extend healthcare access to people, that's actually benefiting us on the back end. Because when you give people healthcare access, they're going to go to preventive visits, right? And if they don't have healthcare access, what they're not going to do is go to preventive visits. And so what happens is they're still going to get sick. And when they get sick, they're still going to end up at the emergency room. And that hospital is still going to treat them, right? So if I have somebody who doesn't have healthcare access and they wait until they have, let's say, a heart attack and they end up at that hospital, they're still going to get serviced. They're still going to be able to get treatment. And when they can't pay for that treatment, that's going to extend to us as taxpayers. And so it's going to increase our premiums. It's going to increase hospital costs. It's going to, we're going to have to pay into something called uncompensated care, which is where our federal tax dollars go in order to compensate these hospitals. And so what you do is if you can get more people healthcare access at a lower cost, because preventive visits are much lower in cost than treating them on the back end, which is a much higher cost. And so I think a lot of people don't realize it's actually a net benefit to get more people healthcare versus just thinking of it as something that we should, only be giving to the deserving.
We've had a Republican governor here, Rick Snyder in Michigan, who kind of passed the baton to Governor Gretchen Whitmer, and both of them worked in a sense in tandem and together to make sure to extend health care benefits and Medicaid benefits in Michigan. And now, of course, we're worried, so many people are, about what could happen to our most vulnerable. Outside of the work requirements and outside of people being dropped from Medicaid, what is the other effect of some of these cuts that we're not talking about?
Well, Medicaid is a big provider of dollars to rural hospitals and nursing homes. And so, the Congressional Budget Office, which is the nonpartisan federal agency, just came out and said that about 10 million people will lose Medicaid benefits. And what happens is when people have when people don't have as much Medicaid benefits, they're not able to pay at these rural hospitals because Medicaid is a big provider of benefits to rural hospitals and nursing homes. And so estimates have shown that likely 400 rural hospitals, this could lead to, hundreds of rural hospitals closing and 1 in 4 nursing homes closing. And so, those are some of the really big downstream effects of this. And so work requirements is one of the ways they're doing this. But another way is that they're just reducing the amount, because Medicaid is a state and federal a federal healthcare service. And so it's paid for by both. And so they're reducing the amount of federal tax dollars that are going to be given to states. And so states are going to have to recoup that. So you're going to see a bigger disparity likely with states. So some states who are going to prioritize funding Medicaid, and you'll see kind of less of those closures versus some states who won't prioritize funding Medicaid. And so you're going to see more people lose their Medicaid coverage. And you will likely see more rural hospitals close and more nursing homes close.
We have to take the politics out of it when we can and talk about who this affects and the bottom line and the human cost and what we can do. And of course, the state also, the lawmakers there have a lot on their hands to perhaps pick up some of the people who fall through the cracks because of this. We're going to watch it carefully. And Jessica, we hope that you'll come back and talk to us on The Pulse, because it was a good conversation.
I appreciate you having me on. Thank you.
Jessica Nurek, we appreciate your time here tonight. That is The Pulse for tonight. Thanks for joining us. I'm Ruth Raj. As always, it was great to be with you.